Good afternoon. Or actually, it's still morning, but it's going on afternoon. I know you want me in the red instead. Did you like that implication better? Somehow the blue lighting's low. You want me to pretend to be someone I'm not, which is ironic because who I am is actually pretty awesome and would have been actually well suited for what you said you needed. But apparently, you actually need something else, right? So let's talk about unemployment insurance. I am on the record and I will acknowledge I am a former recipient of unemployment insurance benefits that I now realize I did not qualify for at the time. And my concern actually is that there are actually a number of people in that situation right now. It may or may not have been a part of some sort of effort to see if you could take the risk of getting some income because you needed income and you were able to find a way to make enough of a justification at the right time to be able to get it for yourself when you needed some money. Or you may have actually been engaged through no fault of your own in an effort to defraud state unemployment compensation networks, uh, regardless of whether or not it was directly connected to COVID 19. This is something I experienced prior to COVID 19. I was put on unemployment insurance during the year of 2014. At the time, I was told that I qualified based upon the work arrangement I had and the fact I had not been fired. And that because I had not been fired and because of the specific manner in which my relationship with my employer ended, it did not preclude me from being able to access unemployment benefits. However, I now realize there was foul play involved with me leaving that job, and that rather than it being something that could have been offset through access to unemployment insurance benefits, that it should actually have been acknowledged as in coordination with an investigation of crime, up to and including financial crime that allowed for other entities with which I was associated without my knowledge to be implicated and placed into a situation of being sanctioned by the Department of Treasury. Nobody informed me of this at the time. I now know that that's the case, and I now know I did not qualify for that unemployment compensation. But I understand and believe it was through no fault of my own, and yet there are long term implications to having been a former recipient of unemployment insurance benefits, as I'm learning now. And there may perhaps be a number of people in this country right now in a similar situation. I will also say that I have information that I have acquired myself about two factors, one personal and one non personal. A, since the onset of COVID 19 and even before, I attempted to apply for jobs at temporary labor organizations, day labor agencies. And you go, you do an interview, you sign up. If they have a job, they call you. Despite not ever being able to successfully fulfill a job at one of these agencies, my understanding is that even if I contact them to tell them to take me out of the system and shut down that account, that they did it. As a matter of fact, recently I had started getting advertisements from a company I signed up for and then requested they shut the account down after the experience I had trying to go out to one of the jobs. Well, they started sending me advertisements for over a month, going on 2 months now. I've called them to see if they actually have jobs available, and it seems as if what they really want is for me to be on site during the morning. I contend that there's actually a period where people on site at these day labor agencies, before they are able to actually go out and work a job, are being used in undisclosed financial transactions concerning other things going on with those agencies that are not something that we are told about when we go in. It may be involved in crime just because they've been getting away with this kind of crime for a long time, up to and potentially including 20 years, where there's been changes to policy regarding temporary labor agencies, as well as subsidies that temporary labor agencies can get, including tax subsidies temporary labor agencies can get, that they can then make available as a benefit to people that contract with them for jobs. Even if that's been going on for 10 to 20 years, it doesn't mean it's not crime. And if nobody brings a compelling case and there's not actual legislative change and there's not actually a kind of public information and exposure of these kind of crimes that allows for us to actually develop and mount, consolidate, and move forward with political momentum to reconcile that, then we're going to be confronted with these situations, which brings us to the current context, which is how many people have applied for a job since the beginning of COVID 19 or were already registered at a temporary or day labor agency prior to the announcements regarding COVID 19. And then we're put into a situation where, without their knowledge, that company was accessing some sort of COVID 19 related relief based upon having our name and information in their system as part of what they alleged was their workforce. How many temporary or day labor agencies are getting PPP for workers they've never gotten a job for and people that haven't actually worked? And how many of those companies have been using accounts set up in people's identity to create fake, or if they have worked with you and you've been able to acquire it yourself, otherwise illegal forms of unemployment compensation based upon not getting your job or not getting a job assigned to you during the time frame wherein COVID-19 has been going on and these alleged relief packages have been outrolled. There was an announcement that the state of California had made a bust regarding illegal unemployment insurance compensation several months ago. If I'm not mistaken, it's more than 6 months ago. But I contend that that was actually part of a long term scheme. That was actually some form of flip on past claims regarding defrauding the state unemployment insurance networks. And that what they did is they were able to mount those cases and get that notice and to get those kinds of prosecutions at the time they did after making an illegal outlay based upon past claims of unemployment insurance fraud, including that may have been processed without even letting the recipients of that unemployment insurance know. I may well have been one of them. It may well have been adjudged after I made a formal request for an examination of my past employment record in the state of California specifically, that I was actually not qualified to receive that unemployment insurance. But it was through no fault of my own. And they sought to recover what would have been the legitimate consideration of those acts of fraud through a later scheme. They do this, and this is part of what we're dealing with now. So if you're somebody that's in this sort of gray area around unemployment compensation insurance, you may well have done things you knew were not entirely legal, or you may have done things in good faith without understanding that it could potentially implicate you in somebody else's crime. But it's very important to be honest about this, and I will be as well. I have not personally received any unemployment compensation insurance, but I am concerned that right now somebody else is working accounts with unemployment compensation insurance in the state of Texas and perhaps in other states using my identity. And this has been allowed to occur because of past efforts I have made to try to work with different states and different local municipalities around acts of fraud involving identity theft, involving other things that had happened. So we may be in a situation where this is very substantial, and this has very significant consequences. This has very significant consequences because, for instance, as was made aware to me, based upon requesting information in consideration of an election campaign last year, I was apprised of laws in the state of Texas regarding administrative process and workers' compensation, and specifically legal matters related to capping of liability in regards to the state unemployment insurance system. And in the state of Texas, at least, one can apply for a workers' compensation claim and can be granted a certain amount of workers' compensation insurance payout up to a certain amount, as long as they agree to cap the liability and forego any sort of future liability. And then that also then puts the company that pays out that unemployment compensation insurance into a specific kind of financial arrangement that may or may not actually have a direct impact on the recipient of that workers' comp. But because you're required to waive the liability for any sort of future action connected to you receiving those funds, I believe they're trying to disabuse other laws and other processes to say that they're under no legal obligation to inform you of that. And if you should find out later that that's happened to you, well, they've already been exempted. You already agreed to waive liability. Now, did they disclose to you up front that they had the intention of using your workers' comp claim as part of a long-term speculation, including speculation that may implicate you in your life in exposure to risk associated with illegal activities, up to and including illegal activities that could be considered felonies? And that were you to engage, including with engage, without any contextualization of the factors going into the speculation on exposing you to that you could use in your defense, might actually result in a change in your status and your capacity to engage in future work because of prosecution? I contend that that's a crime. I contend it's a crime to intentionally engage someone in that form of long term speculation, not disclose to them, and not secure their consent. If that's what they're doing with these temporary labor agencies, which may well be the case, and if that's what they're doing with these offers to cap liability when it comes to giving you a specific monetary payout on workers' compensation, I contend that's a crime. It's a very considerable crime. Now, it may involve people that on a ledger sheet or based on public reportings in the media are at least presumably possessed of great wealth and great resources. But ultimately, what we get to at the end of the day is that that wealth and those resources are ours. And it's not appropriate if we're going to have a long term consideration of our welfare and the welfare of our people for us to agree to cap liability when it comes to gambling and losing. I didn't agree to let them gamble with my life. And if they were going to gamble with my life, there would have been terms. And perhaps you feel the same. Secondly, last year, there was an announcement early in the announcement regarding the COVID 19 situation that there had been a closing of a major oil refinery in what is identified as the area, some places would identify it as Appalachia. Related to a shale patch. If I am not mistaken, the specific company of concern was Shell Oil. It had closed down its operations in this area, and a number of people were, as it was reported in the media, given the pink slip. They were identified as being on some sort of layoff, and this was alleged to be for a number of factors. Now, I contend that if you're somebody that has past experience working specifically in the gas and oil refining sector or having to do with various upstream or midstream processes associated with the gas and oil sector, that you're in a very unique position, especially in regards to COVID 19. And if, at least if you're in the state of Texas, specifically in regards to past exposure to or experience with workers' compensation claims, either for or in connection with you personally or potentially within and in the context of your workplace, and how that might impact you and your employment opportunities if you should have to leave, or if you should be put into a situation where you are put into a scenario of having to receive resources, including public resources, with other people that did not have that past work experience. And I contend that this is a very, very important sector in our economy right now. It's in a very significant transition and is also being politicized in a very disingenuous manner. The reason this is specifically concerning to me is because I will let you know my grandfather had personal experiences in a variety of sectors. And since my grandfather died, I have been in various ways conscious of manners in which his estate has been applied. Not just within the state of Texas or in the state or the area where he lived, which would have been closer to that shale patch than things going on in Texas, but having to do with past things that he did. And one of the things my grandfather did when he was in the military is he was a military police officer that actually was involved in overseeing actions and overseeing the welfare of people that were in prison aboard a military installation. He was a military policeman who was a form of prison official, overseeing a prison, being involved with administration of prisoners aboard a military installation. During a time frame, by the way, when Jim Crow was still in effect, and so far as I understand, in a state that was south of the Mason-Dixon line. So we had a particular kind of experience with this period of time in his life. And what happened was the day that that announcement was made about that specific shale patch closing down and those specific workers, which had a specific number associated with them on that specific day, being announced as being put into a layoff situation, the currents that were going on concurrent to that experience were not about workers being laid off. They were about people being processed through some form of criminal justice program. That the underwriting on that specific announcement related to the layoff of those specific people was not about being laid off from a legitimate job in a shale patch. It was about people being signed up in connection with some sort of prison furlough program. This is exactly the kind of fraud I'm talking about. And then the question becomes, were those workers put into a situation where they were required or they were requested, with some potential benefit being given to them under the context of agreeing to be confidential or agreeing to keep quiet about crimes they had been exposed to with an understanding that there were these other things going on that would have fraudulently mischaracterized that situation. Now, that specific workplace was connected to a very highly politicized context, the details of which have not been presented accurately and have not been presented officially by anybody from any political affiliation. But I am acknowledging that I was a witness, if nothing else. And I understand a little bit about what was going on in that context that has a long term ramification up until this day. In the beginning of last year, the National Petroleum Council released a series of documents that I understand was part of a multi year process where they were discussing an upcoming paradigm of wishing to make an energy transition and focusing on a form of carbon capture as a particular kind of systematology for analyzing and assessing the natural resource needs of the country. Uh, Announcement on the release of these reports correlated with the 25th anniversary of a major series of public notices and publications about the history and what could be considered a strategic plan associated with the National Petroleum Council. However, around the time that would have had its literal anniversary and around the time that it was being set up for elements of these strategies regarding carbon capture to be put into effect, there was also a legislated mandated drawdown that was supposed to occur through the strategic petroleum reserves that some people want to say ended up getting postponed. Now, the thing is, it was legislatively mandated for several years. And so, if in fact it was determined that it was not to occur, there are very serious implications and there were very specific and significant things that had to be done in order to make sure that was safe and legal. I am concerned that they did not do this in a safe or legal manner, specifically because they had an intention of trying to create a risk paradigm for speculation. Now, these are primary factors that would need to be addressed right now if we're going to talk honestly and accurately about any sort of energy transition.